Hello, my name is Father Gregory Pine, and I'm a Dominican friar of the province of St. Joseph, and this is Pints with Aquinas. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to say that God doesn't change. Basically, how that's good news, and how we can still account for change in the world, even though God himself does not, or God is not one of those changing things. So, yeah, here we go. All right, the question which inspires this particular episode is, it's a question from one Ian, who asks, can you break down how God operates in his acting in the lives of humans without him changing? So maybe just a word about not changing, and then a word about God's activity in the world, and how that looks. So first, God doesn't change. Why do we say that God doesn't change? Well, so for those of you nerds who like sweet terminology, we typically refer to this as the doctrine of divine immutability. You probably recognize that word immutable. It just means not, mutable, changing, or change. All right, so God doesn't change. The reason for which we would affirm this doctrine is because we want to avoid, or we just don't want to simply, attribute anything to God which would signify a kind of imperfection. Why? Well, because God's very nature is to be, okay? St. Thomas refers to God as very being itself, subsisting through itself. So God doesn't receive his existence, he doesn't receive his being from another. Rather, he is the ultimate explanation for all being that we encounter in this world and for all the different ways in which being which we encounter in this world interacts, all right? This is the kind of logic that's at work in St. Thomas's 5 ways. So when we talk about God, we want to remove from our understanding of him any notion of like becoming, or any notion of improving, or any notion of evolving. All right, God just is from all eternity, and God is utmostly. God is most perfectly. All right, so in God we find fullness of goodness and infinity and eternity and omnipresence and immutability and unity and ... You see where this is going? Okay. Now, we, by comparison, do become. So, like we go from not being to being. That's a big change. We go from being, like this quantity, like I went from being 9 pounds, 9 ounces to being like 175 pounds. Or we go from being ignorant to being somewhat knowledgeable about random facts concerning the NBA in the year 2021. Or we go from being over here to being over there. Like I went from being in Washington, D.C. to being in Freiburg, Switzerland. So we undergo all these different types of changes. And the question, I think, is how do we relate God's not changing to our changing and still have some semblance of a relationship with him? So maybe let's just say a couple words of clarification as to what that relationship is and how it works on both sides. So for instance, like think about creation. In creation, it seems like a lot's changing, right? So there wasn't, and then there was, although how you talk about time before creation is kind of tricky because time is just a measure of change, but we'll leave that to the side. So when we talk about the fact that there wasn't anything and then there was, is that a change on the part of God? St. Thomas will respond, no, okay? Because basically what we have in creation is a relation of dependence. So God makes things to come forth from him, to emanate from him by his free choice. Why? Well, because he desires that they partake of his divine abundance. It's as if God has a secret too good to keep, and he tells that secret in creation. Or it's as if the divine life almost spills over the bounds of the divine nature. But does that signify some change in God? No. Well, you're thinking, but he didn't want to create and then he did want to create. No, because there's no time in God, so God's eternal. So to God, all of these different moments in our existence, which we experience one after the next, are present to him and eternal now because he possesses all of his life, whereas we only possess our life from step to step to step. So there's no time before which and time after which in God. God chose to create freely, but in no wise does he himself change. And the fact that we exist and depend upon him for life doesn't entail a change in him, because it's a kind of mixed relation. We depend on him, but he doesn't depend on us. So we receive everything from him, but he doesn't receive anything from us. All right. Now, what about the fact that there seems to be a kind of pedagogy at work in the world, or a salvation history? It seems like God is orchestrating changes, or that God is doing one thing at a particular time and then seemingly another thing at another time. You might even just think about the Old Testament. God has certain laws in place, and in the New Testament, he sets certain of those laws aside. The Ten Commandments, no, those remain in place, but certain ceremonial precepts or certain judicial precepts of the old law that you find in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, they're no longer in place. So did God change his mind? No. Like we said at the top, God's working, or God's kind of acting in the world is pedagogical. So, for instance, I was talking to Trent Horn recently, and he was saying, I have 3 kids who are 6, 3, and 1, maybe 6, 4, and 1, I've forgotten. And he says, I can explain the same point to each of them, but I'm going to use different language, okay? Just that different language will reflect their different intelligence or their different maturity. And so a thing that I can explain in one way to a 6-year-old, I need to explain in a more simple way to a 4-year-old, to a 1-year-old. You see where this is going. Okay. So as we progress in the life of grace as a church, as the people of Israel, into whom we are grafted, God is able to speak to us with greater maybe specificity, or with greater clarity, or with, I don't know, instructions which are more concrete, which reveal the fullness which he himself came in human flesh to bring about. So the changes which we ourselves undergo, which we witness, which seem to be baked into the divine plan, don't represent the fact that, or don't represent a change in God. They just represent the fact that God's one plan, present to him from all eternity, is wise, and that it takes account of our condition, that it reflects our condition, and leads us up and out and through our condition. All right. Maybe third and final, let's just talk a little bit about the divine friendship. I think that maybe this is a worry of people because God can't change. We're concerned that we don't have a real relationship with him, because in our ordinary human experience of these matters, there's a kind of give and take. So I learned something from you, and you learned something from me, and together we proceed hand in hand by a kind of shared growth unto the fullness of life in some way, shape, or form. All right. Well, this can't be said of God, because God doesn't learn anything from us. God doesn't grow from us. So are we really friends, or are we just mooching off him? I think maybe the category of friendship has to be supplemented by the category of a father and his children, okay? So you think about like a 2-year-old, for instance. A 2-year-old relies on its parents for everything, okay? So relies on its parents for food, drink, shelter, warmth, instruction, love, meaning, defense, etc., all those things. Now, does that make that human being detestable in the sight of humanity on account of the fact that it does nothing for himself, just mooches off its parents, living off the fat of the land, not contributing to society, content just to coo and to sleep and to toddle about? No, all right? That's what children are supposed to do, and that's entirely fine. Now, mind you, they mature into a position where they're able to contribute to human society in a more, stable fashion or thoroughgoing way. But in our case, we always stand before God as children. That's our fundamental identity. And we fear not, says the Gospel of Luke, because it is the Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. So, no, we're not on equal footing with God. And no, in this divine friendship which God has vouchsafed to us, we don't make him the better for it. But there is a sense in which we are kind of vessels of his glory. So by the fact that we respond to his call to live in divine grace, to attain to glory, to make manifest his name, and to glorify him in the ways in which we are made possible of such feats, right? We kind of give extensive dimensions to, or I don't know exactly how you would describe this, but we make his glory known. We make his glory known, which is not nothing, okay? Which is decidedly not nothing. Now, does God need his glory to be made known? No, but it's wonderful that it be made known. So in a certain sense, we're kind of like extra to God, but God chose that we be. And so while we are extra, yet we are known, right? Yet we are seen, yet we are loved. And on account of that, we can kind of know to the marrow of our bones that it's good that we exist, because God has declared himself decidedly for us. So I would say, don't evaluate the excellence of your relationship with God or the meaningfulness of your relationship with God based on whether you supply for some need in the divine life, because you don't. I would say think about it more from the perspective that God chose you to be, that God loved you into existence, and that God wills that your life refract his glory in some way that's unique and particular to the vocation which he entrusts to you. And as a result of which, though he doesn't rely on you to make his glory known, yet in his great condescension, he has seen fit to give you that opportunity to do so, because it's good that you be made like him. It's good that you in turn return to that divine abundance from which you came forth. So, yes, God doesn't change, but take heart. Your life is more than one of mere contribution. Your life is one of great, great glory. All right. So that's what I wanted to say. This, my friends, is an episode of Pints with Aquinas. So if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to the channel and push the bell, and that way you'll get sweet updates on what goes on this channel. And if you haven't yet, also do check out Godsplaining, Godsplaining, which is a podcast of the Dominican Friars of the province of St. Joseph, to which I contribute, which I think is good. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that I think that it's good. So you should check it out. All right, prayers for you. Please pray for me. I'll catch you next time on Pints with Aquinas.